We're a minute past. Okay. I'd like to welcome everyone to session 4. We are in the session on nitrogen fertilizer and legumes and pasture and hay production. The presenter will be Dr. Ed Rayburn. Before we introduce Dr. Rayburn, I want to point out that we do have a sign-in sheet inside the door there on the right as you enter the room that has to do with those of you who need nutrient management credit. It hasn't been approved yet. This program will be submitted for that, so if you sign in, you'll get credited for awarded credit for this program. So those of you who need to do that, please be aware. Also, we've tried to distribute evaluations for the program, so be sure to do that at the conclusion of the program and leave them on the rear table with the sign-in sheet as well. So for this presentation, as I said, Dr. Ed Rayburn will be our presenter. A little bit about Dr. Rayburn. He's an extension specialist at West Virginia University. He works with other specialists, county agents, farmers, conservation district, and NRCS staff in developing and implementing on-farm research and teaching programs to support pasture-based livestock production and to help landowners develop improved pasture production systems on their farms. That was all one sentence. Ed previously worked for the USDA Soil Conservation Service in Western New York as an RC&D grassland specialist, serving dairy, beef, sheep producers in western counties of New York. Ed and his wife Sue, 3 border collies, and 30 cows manage a pasture-based farm in Preston County, West Virginia. So please welcome Dr. Ray.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Let's talk about nitrogen. I have been warned that if I push the wrong button, this will all blow off and the computer will go offline. Why is nitrogen important? Nitrogen is key for forming proteins in plants and animals. Actually, a simple calculation, if you know the nitrogen in a forage crop, all they do is multiply it by 6.25 to estimate what we call crude protein. And you can go backwards if you're looking at how much nitrogen is in a ton of hay, how much crude protein is in a ton of hay. You can use that same number to back calculate how much nitrogen is there. Now, proteins are essential in plants and animals because they are used in what we call enzymes. And the enzymes are what actually make our bodies and our plants function. So that's why proteins are so important. Where do we get our nitrogen from? Well, a lot of the old timers used to say we got nitrogen out of snow, and it is true we do get nitrogen out of snow and rainfall. We probably get more out of rainfall during a thunderstorm than we would during snow during the winter. But what numbers have been calculated for West Virginia would say that we get about 50 pounds per acre per year of nitrogen in our rainfall. We have commercial fertilizer, which is chemical nitrogen fixation. Then we have legume, which is biological nitrogen fixation. If you think about it, I forgot the percentage. Was it 80% of our air is nitrogen? That's what I thought you were from Ohio. I needed your help.
78.
Or 78? Well, and I'm just using, thank you. I tend to round things off to the big numbers. So 78%, but for us that round it off, 80% of this air is nitrogen. But it can't be used until it's fixed into a form, either through chemical fixation or biological fixation, to make it into a form that can be used by the plant, and ultimately by us. Now, of course, on the farm, Then we have a lot of soil reserve nitrogen. You've heard this term healthy soil. Let's just look at that. Let's just look at the beef cow. This is a beef cow and a calf in rotational grazing. So anytime they go into a paddock, now on the acre basis, over the grazing season, we're talking about 450 pounds of beef cow and calf out there. Now I'm just saying here that we're going to have a pasture about 8 or 10 inches high, so that's around 2,500 pounds of dry matter. And we have so that's above ground. The cow, their calf, and forage dry matter. Down in the soil, we're going to have about that much root mass from the plants growing up above. We have just as much, in round numbers, bacteria. The actinomycetes, back when I was in college, they were just a different type of bacteria, but they've evolved over that 60 years, and they're now in different organisms. So, fungus. Look at the fungus. Almost as much fungus as we have roots, bacteria, and actinomycetes. So all of this, earthworms. I love earthworms. We probably have more pounds of earthworms than we have pounds of cows. But all of this material holds nitrogen, and they're part of the nitrogen cycle. As bacteria, let's say it this way, let's start with roots. If I have roots, I graze it, some roots die, it's not necessarily bad, because those roots feed bacteria. The bacteria catch the nitrogen, and consuming those, the organic matter in the roots. And then actually, the nematodes are very useful because bacteria tend to hoard nitrogen. And these free living nematodes, they eat bacteria. And that's how the nitrogen is released back out into the soil, so that the grass can use that nitrogen. But I'm not going to, I just want to emphasize the soil community is a vast community that is working for us. And so here's how some of this is working. I have a legume here. It's photosynthesizing. It's got bacteria, rhizobium bacteria down here in nodules that it's protecting from the environment. So the bacteria down here in the roots, in the nodules, it's using the sugar that the plants getting out of the sunshine through photosynthesis. Then I have fungus down here that will help transport nitrogen between that legume plant and grasses. And these fungus, they do it on an economic basis. They don't do it for free. Fungus will bring phosphorus from the soil into the plant root, but they're exchanging it for sugar. And they come over here and will participate with the grass by providing some nitrogen to the grass. Now, let's just jump over to grass response to nitrogen fertilizer for a minute. Number one, this is very predictable. This is one of the most predictable things out there that we have to work with, as long as you look at it in the right manner. So, very predictable. We can predict the response within plus or minus 10%, about 66% of the time. But we have to do it relative to yield potential. Okay, we have to adjust for what is the potential yield. And what determines potential yield? You know a lot of this already. Soil type. soil's different yield potential. Primarily because of depth, drainage, and the health of the soil. Those are the big soil factors that determine yield potential. Now, we'll talk a little bit about grass species. Nitrogen source does have an impact. Is it nitrate or urea fertilizer? These days, we don't have a lot of choices. Usually, we get urea-based fertilizer. Ammonium nitrate kind of out the door because it's too good for making bombs. You can get ammonium sulfate. That's not nitrate, but it's another source of nitrogen. So nitrogen rate and timing have an impact, but timing is not that big a factor. It is a factor, but it's not as big as I used to think it was. Then rainfall amount, timing, and distribution. Land has to have water. Especially when we're using urea. If we put urea out there, it'd be nice to get about 1/4 to 1/2 inch of rainfall right after we apply it. So we can get that urea down into the soil. Then of course, if you get too much rain, now on our heavy soils, the big problem is you'll get denitrification. Too much rain gets the oxygen out of the soil, and then you get bacteria that like to eat nitrogen, the nitrate, and turn it into nitrogen gas or nitrous oxide, which is not good. Okay, so there's a nice orchardgrass plant, nice and green. It's got a lot of nitrogen. Somebody must have put a lot of fertilizer on it, right? No. No nitrogen, no commercial nitrogen was put on this orchard. It's getting it all from the view in this case. But let's look at soils. It doesn't matter what the soil type is here. It's a fine, here's a fine sandy loam, silt loam. The slope is important. We have a moderate slope. Now the fine silt loam. Now notice that alfalfa is not doing as well on that as it is doing on the same that has a little bit better drainage. Okay. As we start going up in slope, the yield potential goes down. When we jump to this soil, which is an upland soil, even though the slope, still, it's a steeper slope, but bottom line is, this soil is just not adapted to alfalfa. You wouldn't grow alfalfa there. So, as we go up in slope, it's not productive there at all, very productive there. I wouldn't grow alfalfa on this soil. But as the slope goes up, we don't even recommend it at all. We come over here to the pasture side, now we can see the effect of slope again. Yes, these lower slopes are doing pretty decent on pasture, but as the slope increases, the productivity of pasture goes down. And why is that? What happens on steep slopes when it rains? It runs off. Okay. Now granted, if I have good management and a good healthy soil, a lot less is going to run, right? So that's the principle, that's the idea. And this is just showing yield potential as it relates to water holding capacity. That as the water holding capacity goes up in the soil, our yield potential goes up. And water holding capacity is determined by two things. How much water is held per inch of soil, and what is the root depth. So if you have a shallow soil, shallow to bedrock, or shallow to a hard pane, you have less rooting depth than if you have a deep soil. grass species differ in yield potential. And here are the grass species we have to work with that work well in our area: tall fescue, orchardgrass, Rayburn grass, smooth growth in the medium perennial rod. This is just an indicator of how many years of experience do we have, how many site years of experience. I've gone back over the variety trials in the region. This would be Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Virginia, and Kentucky, some from Ohio, and looking at yield across those sites for the species, not breaking out varieties. Our most productive grass, like it or not, is tall fescue. Okay. Orchardgrass, a little bit lower. And on down. Let's look at this relative yield. Now, this number here is based on where we're going to compare everything to orchardgrass. That's what everybody loves, right? Okay. So this is a comparison where I have fescue growing in the same site the same year. So this is a direct comparison between tall fescue and orchardgrass. On average, fescue is about 7% more productive than orchardgrass. Green canary grass, a little bit lower. We have a lot of people that really rave about perennial ryegrass, and I'm not one of them. I don't recommend perennial ryegrass, primarily because we're pushing basically 30% less yield potential than tall fescue has, plus the potential of dying fairly quick. So that's why I'm not a perennial ryegrass proponent. I don't have bluegrass on here because they don't have bluegrass in these variety trials. Now, this is showing the regional effect of nitrogen fertilization on grass hay production. The blue line is the dry matter yield. So what I've done here is I'm using orchardgrass as the thermometer. The green line is just looking at relative yield. And that's the important one there. Because that line actually applies to all the species once you've adjusted for yield potential within a year. And that's the way life is, right? Some years are good, some years are bad. And so that's why we have to adjust for species and year when we make this adjustment. And what that's saying is that if I put on, let me come here, that's about 75 pounds of nitrogen, right? And so that's saying if I apply 70 pounds of nitrogen per year, I'm going to get about 60% of the yield that grass would have given me on that site that year compared to 350 pounds a gallon. Now, we don't recommend 350 pounds, okay? But it's showing you the relative effect. We want to be working back in here somewhere, in this 50 to 200 pound range. And again, I'm not suggesting that should be commercial fertilizer. Down here at 0 nitrogen, that grass is getting nitrogen not from commercial fertilizer, but from the soil and from any leftover legumes that are in that experiment. Because not all of these experiments totally got rid of the legume. If I left the dots in here, there would have been some legume here, and sometimes there would be some higher rates of legume in those things. It all depended on who was doing the research. Did they eliminate legumes or just let them stay in there? But what we can tell from this, a lot of you use 50 pounds of nitrogen in the spring, right? Okay. Again, 75 pounds, and I choose to double that, or a little bit more than double, my nitrogen rate, I'm going to be going from 60% yield potential to up around 80% yield potential. So that's how I can use this chart. Where am I today? If I'm down here at 50 pounds of N, that's, well, in round numbers, that's 50% of yield potential. Okay? If I jump up here to 150, let me just say 75% of yield potential. So it's giving you a feeling for how much more yield. 75 versus 50, that's another 50%. If I'm getting 2 tons, I should be able to get 3 tons. Okay, you see how that's of use to us? Okay, stockpiled all fescue. Let me just skip on that one. I did not push that button. I think I pushed it anyway. Like I told Cheryl, what she was telling me, it's like carrying a gun around. You never put your finger on the trigger when you're hunting until you're ready to shoot the deer. Okay. Okay, that's the okay. Legumes also different yield potential. And again, I'm putting orchardgrass in here just like I did for the grasses, just so we can look at things relative to orchardgrass. Okay. Orchardgrass. Now, orchardgrass. And I should have told you this before. All those grasses were fertilized at 150 to 220 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year. So that's what this yield potential of orchardgrass is. If you were to fertilize orchardgrass at this range, and we're going to call that 1, alfalfa will go about 25% more, assuming it's a good alfalfa soil, all right? If it's not an alfalfa soil, or one that's, what is an alfalfa soil? 2 feet of well-drained soil, pH of over 6.5, P and K in the high range. So, alfalfa is more productive. Red clover, not too far behind it. So, if you look at that, it's only 6% behind the orchardgrass. So, that's not saying that red clover is making that much nitrogen, but it is saying it's yielding equivalent to a grass fertilized at that rate of nitrogen. Okay? Because remember, there's more to it than just the nitrogen fixation. So it is pointing out that red clover has a lot of yield potential relative to that rate of nitrogen fertilizer. And likewise with the alfalfa. Okay, so there's alfalfa. Just going to look at some pictures. Red clover, a little bit more mature than what we might want. Still nice red clover. And I like mixtures. Here's some Botanical, Ladino white clover, some red clover in the stand. How much legume in the stand? Well, it depends. Is it an established sod that has good, healthy organic matter? Remember all those critters we looked at back in that earlier picture? Or is it following a crop in rotation, which has used up all the nitrogen? Here's an example of 2 sites. Now, on each site, we've seeded red clover in some plots and birch-foot trefoil in other plots. What we learned is there was no difference between red clover and birch-foot trefoil in terms of yield. Site 1, this is a site that was seeded. Okay, the yield is the year after the seeding year, but it was seeded in wheat stock. So we've grown corn, we 2 or 3 years, a wheat crop, then we reseeded this stand in the fall after the wheat stubble, and then look at production after, well, actually it may have been the following summer at that site. This site was actually spring seeded. This site was an old sod, many years old. I don't know how many years, but it was an old sod, seeded down. And so this has a lot of organic matter. Notice that where we have a lot of organic matter, we maximize yield. By maximum, I'm saying 80% to 100% of yield with only 20% legume in the stand. Over here, where we burned up the organic matter, it wasn't wasted. We made a corn crop or two, made a wheat crop out of it. So we sucked a lot of nitrogen out of it in making those crops. But we had to have about 60% legume in those stands before we had maximum yield. And part of that is the fact that the grass doesn't have the nitrogen, so therefore it's easy for the legume to compete. The grass is non-competitive because it doesn't have free nitrogen available. And so therefore the legume actually, it's able to be 60% of the stand. Whereas down here, I have a lot of organic matter that's being cycled by those critters in the soil, which is stimulating the grass. And so it's actually more difficult for the legume to be more than 20% of the stand now. So, Chris, you have a question?
Do you have what I call a legume cycle in pastures? I mean, over years.
Okay, legume cycle, hold that question. We're going to talk about that. Okay. Yield of grass legume versus nitrogen fertilized grass. I just want to show you a few charts. Here we happen to have orchardgrass fertilized with nitrogen, different rates from 0 up to that 300. And we're using bird's foot trefoil, but remember that could be red clover. They're pretty well comparable. Notice that here the legume in that grass, the legume grass mix in this example is making about the same yield as 112 pounds of nitrogen on the grass. Okay. Just to show you another one. Here we have smooth Bromegrass, the gray bars versus Timothy, the blue bars. If we had Alfalfa, Ladino, Clover, it was making as much forage as less than 200 pounds, but up here in the 150-pound range. The bird's foot trefoil, red clover, what, 100 pounds, something like that. Comparable to the grass fertilizer nitrogen. And again, the same sort of trend here. This is alfalfa fraction, smooth brome and orchardgrass. Up here, where we fertilize with 150 pounds of nitrogen, would be comparable or a little bit lower. We do that because orchardgrass is more vigorous, higher yield. Alfalfa is more vigorous and higher yield. Then here's little old Ladino Clover. A lot of times we don't think about that. This is actually a hay cut. Notice the 4 years of data. Here's Fescue with Clover. Here's the Fescue with 120 pounds of nitrogen. Now this data actually comes from Kentucky, but this is a soil that we have here in West Virginia. So this is, it's Kentucky data. It really is West Virginia data, okay? That's why I want, and it's also just Ladino Clover. This is not alfalfa. This is not red clover. Bird's foot trefoil. And look at how little additional response we got from 120 pounds of N. Now notice here, clover stand in April was about 24% on the zero nitrogen treatment. The clover content on 120 pounds of N was only 8%. Now that's the average over the 4 years of this study. Important point here. If you want clover in your stand, take the nitrogen out of the stand. Okay? We've killed more clover in West Virginia by cross-seeding clover in January and February and then coming back and putting triple 19 on in April and May. If you're going to put on clover seed, do not put on nitrogen. If you want to put on nitrogen, fine. Just don't put on the clover seed, but you're wasting your money. Because that nitrogen in the spring is going to kick that grass off, and it's just going to smother those little clover seedlings out and kill them. Now, so by taking the nitrogen off and just letting Ladino clover come in, even though it's a hay stand, and I don't recommend seeding Ladino clover as a hay crop, okay? But I'm just saying this is what happens to us, or what can happen to us. And it also has major economic impact, if you were thinking about it. But I'll come back to that. Legumes improve forage quality and animal growth. Legumes have less fiber, neutral detergent fiber. They have more sugar, non-structural carbohydrates. Animals eating it, eat more when there's legume in it. Net result, you get a quarter of a pound to a half a pound a day gain more if there are 20 to 30% legume in the state. So the downside, livestock eat more forage. Okay? That does impact you, especially if it's a hay crop. If you change a hay crop from a straight grass to a grass legume, and you're used to feeding 100 bales of hay, they're going to eat more bales of hay. You're going to have more bales of hay. They're going to come out in a lot better condition. Okay, just wanted to show you some relationship here. Here's the day of the year. Okay, so day 180, just divided by 30, so that's June. That's the end of June, right there. Okay? And so here we're looking at crude protein. The blue curve is grass, and that's how crude protein changes in our rotationally grazed pastures here in West Virginia. Now, all of these relationships are grass, legume, and forbs in the same pasture under the same management. So, look at the legume, how much protein we have in our legume. In our forbs, broadleaf weeds is what we call them a lot of times, but they're in between the legumes and the grass, a little bit closer to the grass. Non-structured carbohydrate, this is sugar and starch. Look how low it is in grass. Our legumes and forbs, they're right up there together. Now they're somewhere in that 25-30% sugar and starch that they have. And the bacteria really love that stuff. Now the fiber, that's important, but neutral detergent fiber. This is the cell wall. Look how much fiber there is in the grass. Now, as long as that fiber is digestible, it's not bad. Problem is, especially during the heat of the summer, a lot of that fiber becomes lignified, and it's not readily digested. But again, here are our legumes and forbs. They're a lot lower in fiber. This is just showing the work from Middleburg, Virginia. Here's orchardgrass with clover versus orchardgrass fertilized with 200 pounds of N. look at the average daily gain. These are 700 pounds stocker steers. The clover, they're making about 1.25 pounds. Under nitrogen, just a little over a pound. Now, something I want to point out is we actually have better cattle today than they had there. And you can expect a better response because you have better growth rate cattle than what they used to have. Clover cycles, okay? Here's a 10-year study, predominantly orchardgrass, Ladino clover stand, and just looking at look at the green line, that's dry matter yield, and yes, dry matter came up. Okay, the blue line is percent clover in the stand, so as the clover content in the stand went up, total yield went up. Something happened, clover content went down, yield went down, then we start going back up. Then here, for some reason, and we'll show you here in a second, the clover stayed up, but yield went down. Okay, and then came back up. So we do have clover cycles. Now, the other factor here was rainfall. This study had rainfall, and you can see that this time the blue line is rainfall. So yields are going up. Remember, clover content went up with rainfall. I just didn't figure how to show all three at one time, so bear with me. Then rainfall went down. Remember, clover content went down. But if you remember, we had the high clover. We had the high clover content, but here our rainfall is going back down. So one factor that's affecting these cycles is rainfall amount. We also have pests out there. Now, if I have a good clover crop, I can expect the development of pests in the state, which can set my clover back. If my clover gets set back, it's going to hurt total yield. But I just wanted to point out that we also get grass yield cycles that we don't talk about as much. Here's grass under nitrogen fertilization. And you can see it's not as pronounced maybe, but here it went down, came up, down, and up. So there are cycles out there. Now, I just want to go back to, this is data, using the data from Kentucky with Ladino clover called Fescue. Nitrogen fertilization, we're using 60 cents a pound for nitrogen. 3 rates, 50 pounds, it's going to cost me $30, 100 pounds, 60, that's simple math. Custom rate is around $11 per application. On the legume side, if I'm looking at a red clover seed, I'm going to throw a little Ladino clover in there. So I'm using the yields from Kentucky, but I am going to put in a cost as if I'm going to plant red clover for hay crop. But I threw in the Ladino clover just to make sure if I lose my red clover, I've got the Ladino clover left. Okay? That's the logic here. So red clover is around $2.85 a pound, Ladino $4.50. I'm going to use somewhere between 4 and 8 pounds of red clover and 1 and 2 pounds of Ladino clover. My seed cost is the low end $16 an acre versus $32 an acre. It's going to cost me $11 if I cross seed. Just broadcasting the seed out there. If I do a no-till drill without any herbicide, that's about $20. Okay? If the stand lasts 2 to 3 years, that annualized cost ranges $9 to $26. Okay? So my cost over here is 3 to 4 times the cost of what I have over there. Now, if we look here at how much more yield did I get at that 120 pound range. What, a little over 6,000 pounds, a little over 7. Here I have about 750 pounds difference. I think I have that some last year. Okay, year 1, 1,000 pounds. Year 2, 750, 500, 500. So that's an average of 688 pounds for using that 120 pounds of net. What's the marginal response? That additional dry matter cost me $209 a ton. You're not going to go out and buy hay at $209 a ton, are you? Now, this is an important principle because what if I have a fescue pasture in the fall that has 30% clover? Are you going to get a good return on your investment applying nitrogen to that fescue stockpile? Now, okay, we've said this before, don't look at us. If you can only graze that field in December and January, then there might be logic in going ahead and applying nitrogen to stimulate the fescue and suppress the clover so that I have more fescue to graze after that hard freeze. On the other hand, if I can come in and flash graze that fescue with either calves, stockers, or dry cows, to use that clover before the freeze melts it and it goes away, you probably don't want to put nitrogen on this thing. You're better off just managing it. Sometime in September, October, early November, go through those paddocks real quick with your, preferably calves or stockers because they'll get the most out of it. Use that clover up. Then after the freeze comes in and kills the clover, now we come back and strip graze that with dry cows to use the rest of that fescue up. So that's what I want you to get thinking about. If you have that 20-30% clover out there, you can apply nitrogen. All you're going to do is change the composition. You're going to have less clover and more grass. If that is important, as grazing in December and January, it would be important, then you make up an economic response to that nitrogen. But if there are alternatives for its use, then you can do it cheaper by not putting the nitrogen out there. Okay? And I get real concerned about applying nitrogen. And I'll be honest. I look at my pastures and my hay fields, and with the amount of clover that I have in there, it's very hard for me to justify, the expense of the nitrogen, because I know I'm just changing species composition. I'm not getting more forage. Now, like I said, if you get more grass, cows will eat less of it in the winter time. And I have not tried to extrapolate the economics to that level yet. But I'm a little sensitive to that. I'll tell you what. A number of years ago, I was at a meeting like this, and a fellow asked me, he says, how can I get my cows to eat more grass? And I said, well, no more hay. Because cows weren't doing it very well. I said, well, you need to get clover in it, and you need to cut it a little earlier. Well, he did that. Came back a year or two later, he was mad at me. He said, I did what you said. My cows ate too much hay. I ran out of hay. He was mad, I'm sorry. But his question was, how do I make my cows eat more hay? I was successful. He wasn't thinking about the fact that he had to have more bales of hay. So think about that. If you want your cows to eat more hay, you have to have more hay there for them to eat. Same goes for pasture. if you get clovers in your pasture, you're used to having just straight grass pasture. They're going to eat more pasture once you put the clover in. But that's why you get a quarter to a half a pound a day gain more on those steers and calves. If you're a dairyman, you get 8 pounds of milk more. So you don't get something for nothing. But likewise, if you do the management right, you do get something for what you put into it. Okay. Like I say, you don't get something for nothing. You do have to manage the legume. Harvest height, we've heard a lot about. Leaving a lot of residual. Leaving a lot of residual is not good for legumes. Okay, like it or not, legumes need light. Their growing points down at ground level. You've got to get a lot of that mass off there if you want a good response to the legume. I'm not arguing with people, I'm just telling you the facts of the way it relates to legumes. Rest interval is very important. Depending on the legume, I'm saying 5 to 6 weeks here. For white clover, especially in the spring, 3 weeks is probably adequate. When we look at alfalfa and red clover, we like them to be in late bud, early flower. Soil fertility, clovers need a pH of 6, alfalfa 6.5 or greater. P and K, we want it in the high range. My definition of high range is you will not get a response to added fertilizer. Okay? We need magnesium up in the high range, and we don't talk about boron much other than in alfalfa, but in the Appalachian region, where they have done studies in North Carolina in the Appalachian Mountains, they are getting a response in clovers to boron. And I've had some farmers tell me when they use borated alfalfa fertilizer, they feel they're getting a response with red clover to boron. It doesn't cost very much. Again, management for legumes, we can get it in there by frost seeding. Frost seeding, I recommend January and February. Some people talk about waiting until March, but we do get more frost in January. Now, by frost, I mean snow's off the ground. Temperatures are cycling between the high 30s, low 40s, and down in the teens and 20s. And what happens? You've seen it before. You get those big frost crystals sticking up out of the ground. When you get those ice crystals, that is what incorporates the seed and puts that seed into the ground. If you move far enough north, you can't do frost seedings. You have snow cover, and then you have spring. There is no frost season in between. Okay, I found that out in New York. And that's why in New York, I got into doing a walk-in seeding. What's a walk-in seeding? Under rotational grazing, you spread the seed out in front of the cattle, and then you turn the cattle into the pasture. But this is where you need high stock density. You want 40,000 pounds of cow per acre for a 24-hour period. And dairy farmers had no problem with the walk-in seed, because that's what they were doing. They were putting 40,000 pounds of cattle. Actually, they were putting 80,000 pounds of cattle per acre for a 12-hour period. And then they put them over into another area for the next 12 hours. And we have wonderful walk-in seedings on the dairy farms. I've done this with beef cattle, and it still works at that 40,000 pounds per acre. The classic, though, is frost seeding, no-till, or conservation districts. You don't have to buy a no-till drill. Everybody has a no-till drill. It's just down to the conservation district. Okay. You can do minimum till. No nitrogen fertilizer in the spring. In the spring seedings. Now, on legumes, our main source of phosphorus is that, which does carry nitrogen. So if we're gonna put phosphorus on the land, and I'm not recommending triple 19, okay? If you're gonna put phosphorus on, yes, there's some nitrogen there. And is that gonna hurt my stain? Not if I put it on in the fall. And it actually could come back to be beneficial in the fall. Because one of our worst pests is what's called Clover root peculiar. It's a root weevil. Okay? Now, with Clover root peculio, their setback, number one, rotational grazing actually reduces them in the stain. But the other thing is, the adults come out in the fall, late summer, okay, mate, lay their eggs. The baby Clover root peculio has to eat clover or alfalfa nodules. And what the research shows that if I put 20 pounds of N, okay, where do I get 20 pounds of N? If I put 200 pounds of, I put 100 pounds of DAP, I put on 18 pounds of N, I'll say this right. DAP is 1846 liters. So if I put on 100 pounds of DAP, I got 18 pounds of N, 46 pounds of P2O5. So that 18 pounds of N is going to set back those nodules a whole lot in the fall. If I get rid of the nodules on my clover plants, I just killed my Clover root peculio babies because that's what they have to eat. All right? Now, does this really work in West Virginia? I think it does. We know that from the research it works. But let me give you an example down in Point Pleasant. We were going to go in there and we were prepping a site for clover demonstration. And we went into Fescue and we said, okay, we're going to smother that clover up. We're going to stockpile that field and raise it off. And we went in there in the fall, put on some nice nitrogen. Then we grazed it off, came back in the spring. We had so much clover in that field, we couldn't do anything with it in terms of a clover demonstration.
Where was that?
Oh, no, this was on a dairy farm. I'm sorry, I forgot. The question was where in Point Pleasant was. Forgive me, it's about 20 years ago. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. What I do remember is the response. Okay. So, now, did we eliminate clover root peculio, and is that why we had so much clovers? I can't guarantee that because I did not go in the fall, look for it. But anyway, bottom line, use your DAP in the fall. It's not going to hurt it. If anything, it's going to help. That's the bottom line. Just showing the results of this is Ladino clover management, 10-year average. How high should it be, and how close should I graze it? Now, when I say how close do we graze it, if I'm measuring it to pasture, remember every pasture has two pastures in it. Now, the part that's grazed, and the part that's not grazed. Where cows defecate and urinate in this cycle, and often the previous cycle, cows aren't going to graze in those spots, are they? So don't measure that. That's not, we're only talking about the grazed area. And let's just look at relative dry matter intake. We're using 10 to 2 as 100%. Now, letting it grow back just to 8 didn't hurt me much. Even letting it grow back to 6 didn't hurt me much. But leaving too much residue, depends on what you're doing and time of year. that's where you get hit more in terms of total annual production. Proper utilization, increase yield, increase legume, and decrease variability. And that's what this number over here. A low number is low variability. Well, what I want to emphasize here is another block there. Okay, if you're going to fertilize, this is Orchardgrass. High fertility, you do actually have to make sure you're out there harvesting it. Why is that with Orchardgrass? Why you have high fertility with Orchardgrass, you get a lot of growth, right? And down there in the bottom, you'll also get a lot of growth in that bottom section. And that lowest leaf will start creeping up. If I come in there with a disc mower and cut down below that bottom leaf, you can do a lot of damage to the orchard grass. So that's why we're having this effect here. Under high nitrogen with 8 cuts, they maintain good ground cover. But when they cut it back, when they only had 3 cuts, they lost half of the stain. And that's because it got up there, grew tall, and they were cutting it under that lower leaf. We want to, even me that likes to graze closely, we want to leave some live leaves. We want live leaves out there, okay? And so, just be careful if you do get into using the nitrogen fertilizer at high rates. So just a summary, pH, 6 for clover, 6.5 for alfalfa. Soil test P, I'm using the WBU extract system, and this would be Virginia Tech also. Over 80 measured as P205, 120 K2O. Legumes also respond to boron. Legumes are less competitive for K than grasses are. That's one reason I want K up in the high range. And legumes do take up more magnesium. They do tend to take up more magnesium because if you look at them, they're green, right? Every chlorophyll molecule has magnesium at the center of it. So if you have more chlorophyll, you need magnesium. And it's also true in terms of forage test. You'll see that legume stands have more magnesium carried over in the forage for the cattle. Forage crops do need nitrogen. The question is, are you going to get it from fertilizer or legumes? Fertilizers are convenient and effective. Legumes require management, but they are lower costs. Legumes increase feed intake, but they also increase animal gain. And I just emphasize, I think it's not cost effective to be putting nitrogen on grass legume stands. You're going to hear some recommendations out there that, okay, if I have 20 to 30% clover, I don't need any nitrogen. Or if I have 10% clover, cut the nitrogen rate in half. Is that good management? The question is, do you want clover? If you want clover, cut the nitrogen out altogether. Give the clover a chance to grow. And that'll take you, good management will take you from 10% clover to 20 to 30% clover. So why spend money for nitrogen? When you want to spend time with management and get the clover. So I think that was the end. Thank you very much. I think we have time.
Questions? Just a couple?
Yes, sir.
Just have a question
tillage record.